An immigrant mother with broken English, a gifted son silenced by a racist school system, and a secret that would bring an entire school board to their knees. What they didn't know? This quiet woman cleaning their offices at night had once been the most feared prosecutor in her home country, and she was about to remind them what justice really looks like. But this story goes deeper than you think, because what happened next didn't just change one family's life. It exposed a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the education system, destroyed careers, and sparked a movement that's still changing lives today. Maria Elena González-Restrepo wasn't always a cleaning lady with calloused hands and tired eyes. 5 years ago, she was the woman who made Colombia's most powerful criminals wake up in cold sweats. In Bogotá, her name was whispered in the halls of power with a mixture of respect and fear. She was the prosecutor who had never lost a case, the woman who took down Senator Carlos Mendoza's human trafficking ring, the lawyer who exposed Judge Patricia Vega's money laundering operation, the investigator who brought down the Medellin cartel's political protection network. Her office walls were covered with death threats. Her desk was piled with cases that other prosecutors were too afraid to touch, and her reputation unbreakable. Until the night everything changed. It was 11:47 p.m. when the first bullet shattered her living room window. Diego, then 7 years old, was sleeping in the next room. The second bullet missed Maria's head by inches as she dove to protect her son. The note left on her doorstep was simple: drop the Mendoza case or your son dies. Maria had faced down cartel bosses, corrupt politicians, and dirty cops. But she had never faced a choice between justice and her child's life. She chose her child. Within 72 hours, she had liquidated everything she owned, destroyed all evidence of her identity, and boarded a plane to Miami with Diego and 2 suitcases. The woman who had been Colombia's most feared prosecutor became just another undocumented immigrant, invisible and forgotten. But you can't erase 20 years of legal training. You can't forget how to read people, how to spot lies, how to build cases that destroy your enemies. You can only hide those skills until the moment you need them most. That moment was coming sooner than she thought. Maria arrived in America with $3,000 in cash, a law degree that meant nothing, and a son who spoke no English. They lived in a motel for 3 weeks until she found work cleaning office buildings at night. The transition was brutal. In Colombia, she had commanded respect, fear, authority. In America, she was invisible. Security guards barely acknowledged her. Office workers left messes for her to clean without a second thought. She was just another immigrant woman with a mop and bucket. But Maria was strategic about her invisibility. She chose her jobs carefully. She cleaned the offices of lawyers, judges, school administrators. She listened to conversations people thought no one could hear. She observed patterns, relationships, power structures. And slowly, she began to understand how the American system really worked. Diego adapted faster than she did. Within 6 months, he was fluent in English. Within a year, he was at the top of his class. His teachers called him exceptional, gifted, brilliant beyond his years. But Maria noticed something else. The way some teachers looked at Diego when they thought she wasn't watching. The way they praised his intelligence with surprise in their voices, as if they couldn't quite believe it. The way they asked again and again if he was getting help at home. She filed these observations away, the way she had once filed evidence in her cases. Because Maria González-Restrepo knew that in any system, knowledge was power, and she was building a very detailed file. Riverside Elementary was considered one of the best schools in the district. It had high test scores, dedicated teachers, and a reputation for academic excellence. It also had a student body that was 78% white, 15% Asian, and 7% other. Diego was part of that 7%. From the beginning, Maria noticed the subtle ways the school treated families like theirs differently. The fundraising events scheduled during work hours that she couldn't attend. The parent-teacher conferences where teachers spoke slowly and loudly, as if volume could overcome language barriers. The way Diego's achievements were always qualified with phrases like "considering his background" or "given his circumstances." But Diego was thriving despite it all. His math scores were off the charts. His reading comprehension was years ahead of grade level. His science projects won competitions. He was, by every measure, a gifted student. Which is why what happened in 5th grade was so shocking. Mrs. Patterson, Diego's math teacher, called Maria in for a conference. "I'm concerned about Diego," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "His work has become inconsistent." Maria frowned. "Inconsistent how?" "Well, he'll solve complex problems correctly, but then miss simple ones. It's almost like he's getting help on the hard problems, but not the easy ones." The implication was clear. Diego was cheating. "My son, he no cheat," Maria said, her English deliberately broken. She had learned that people revealed more when they thought she understood less. "Of course not intentionally," Mrs. Patterson said quickly, "but perhaps someone at home is helping him too much. It's important that children do their own work." Maria nodded meekly and left. But that night, she did something she hadn't done since Colombia. She opened an investigation file. Over the next 2 years, Maria documented everything. Every comment, every grade, every interaction. She attended school board meetings, sitting in the back, invisible and ignored. She read every policy, every procedure, every regulation. And slowly, a pattern emerged. It wasn't just Diego. Over the past 5 years, 17 high-achieving minority students had been flagged for academic irregularities. 17 students who had lost opportunities, scholarships, advanced placement. 17 families who had been told their children weren't quite as smart as they seemed. The accusations always followed the same pattern: a sudden improvement in test scores, questions about help at home, suggestions that the student was overperforming their expected level, and always the same solution: additional testing, additional scrutiny, additional barriers. Maria began to map the connections. Mrs. Patricia Henderson, the academic integrity coordinator, was involved in every case. Principal Morrison signed off on every decision, and the testing company they used for verification tests, Pinnacle Educational Services, had some very interesting financial connections. But Maria needed more than patterns. She needed proof, the kind of proof that would hold up in court. So she did what any good prosecutor would do. She went undercover. Maria's night job cleaning the school district offices gave her access to places and conversations that others never saw. But she needed to be more systematic, more strategic. She began volunteering for additional shifts, specifically targeting the nights when she knew key personnel would be working late. She memorized schedules, learned routines, identified opportunities, and she began to record everything. The small recording device she used was the same model she had used in Colombia to catch corrupt officials. Virtually undetectable, with a battery life of 12 hours and crystal clear audio quality. She had smuggled it out of Colombia, along with her other insurance policies, evidence files that could still bring down powerful people if they ever tried to find her. The first breakthrough came on a Thursday night in March. Henderson was working late, and Maria positioned herself in the supply closet adjacent to her office. The walls were thin, and Henderson's voice carried clearly. No, the Gonzalez boy is perfect for this," Henderson was saying to someone on the phone. "High scores, minority background, single mother who barely speaks English. They never fight back effectively." Maria's hands clenched, but she kept recording. We've done this 17 times in the past 5 years. The pattern is foolproof. Flag them for irregularities. Require additional testing under our supervision. Document the inconsistencies and recommend remedial placement instead of advanced programs. A pause. Of course it's about maintaining standards. These programs are designed for students who can truly excel. We can't lower the bar just to meet diversity quotas. We're actually doing these kids a favor, saving them from failure in programs they're not equipped for. Another pause, and Henderson's voice became colder. The beauty of the system is that it's completely legal. We're not discriminating. We're ensuring academic integrity. And the families never have the resources to fight back effectively. What's a cleaning lady going to do? Hire a lawyer? Maria smiled grimly in the darkness. Henderson was about to find out exactly what this cleaning lady could do. But Henderson's phone call was just the beginning. Over the next several weeks, Maria uncovered a conspiracy that went far deeper than she had imagined. Pinnacle Educational Services wasn't just a testing company, it was a family business. Henderson's brother-in-law, Robert Chen, was the founder and CEO. Her sister, Linda Chen, was the head of assessment integrity, and the company had an exclusive contract with the school district worth $2.3 million annually. The financial incentives were clear. Every irregular test result that Pinnacle identified triggered additional testing, additional fees, additional revenue. The company was literally being paid to find problems with minority students' performance. But it went even deeper than that. Maria discovered that Pinnacle had contracts with 17 school districts across 3 states. And in every district, the same pattern emerged. High-achieving minority students flagged for irregularities. Additional testing that somehow always resulted in lower scores. And opportunities redirected to white and Asian students. It wasn't just discrimination. It was a systematic, multi-state conspiracy to maintain educational segregation through the guise of academic integrity. And at the center of it all was a network of administrators, testing officials, and education consultants who were getting rich by destroying children's futures. Maria had seen corruption before. She had prosecuted cartels, politicians, and judges. But this was different. This was an attack on children, on families, on the very idea that education could be a path to a better life. It was personal now. Diego's invitation to take the state mathematics competition came in April. It was exactly the opportunity Maria had been waiting for. The competition was prestigious, with winners receiving full scholarships to advanced summer programs and guaranteed placement in accelerated high school tracks. It was also the perfect bait for Henderson's trap. Maria knew what would happen. Diego would excel in the competition, just as he always did. His scores would be surprisingly high for a student of his background, and Henderson would spring into action with her standard playbook. But this time, Maria would be ready. She spent weeks preparing for the confrontation, like she was preparing for the trial of her life. She researched every law, every regulation, every precedent that applied to their situation. She contacted her old colleague from Colombia, now a civil rights lawyer in Miami, who helped her understand the American legal landscape. And she prepared Diego for what was coming. "Mijo," she told him one evening as they sat at their small kitchen table, "something is going to happen after your competition. Something unfair. But I need you to trust me and stay calm no matter what they say." Diego looked up from his homework, concern in his eyes. "Are they going to say I cheated again?" "Probably. But this time we're going to be ready for them." "How?" Maria smiled, and for a moment, Diego glimpsed the woman she had been before they came to America. "Because, mijo, your mother knows how to fight, and it's time I reminded some people of that." The state mathematics competition was held at the university, in a large auditorium filled with the brightest students from across the region. Diego sat among them, calm and focused, while Maria watched from the parent section. The test was challenging. Calculus problems that would stump most high school students. Logic puzzles that required genuine mathematical insight. Proofs that demanded both creativity and rigor. But Diego moved through them with the same methodical precision Maria had watched him display countless times at their kitchen table. When the results were announced 3 days later, Diego had placed first in his age group and third overall. His score was the highest ever recorded by a middle school student in the competition's 15-year history. Maria felt a surge of pride, but also a cold certainty about what would happen next. She didn't have to wait long. The call came on a Monday morning. Principal Morrison's voice was carefully neutral, professionally concerned. "Mrs. Gonzalez, we need to discuss Diego's competition results. There are some irregularities that need to be addressed." "Irregularities?" Maria kept her voice small, confused. "His performance was quite exceptional, perhaps too exceptional. We need to verify that the results accurately reflect his individual capabilities." The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. Maria would be allowed to attend, but not to participate in the assessment process. Diego would be retested under proper supervision to ensure academic integrity. Maria hung up the phone and immediately called her lawyer in Miami. "It's happening," she said simply. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 5 years." The 2 days before the meeting were a whirlwind of preparation. Maria's lawyer, Carlos Mendez, no relation to the senator she had prosecuted, flew in from Miami with a team of civil rights specialists. They reviewed every piece of evidence Maria had collected, every recording, every document. "This is extraordinary," Mendez said, looking through her files. "You've built a federal case here. Civil rights violations, conspiracy, fraud. This could bring down the entire network." "I don't want to bring down a network," Maria replied. "I want to protect my son. The network is just in the way." But Maria also made other preparations. She contacted the families of the other 17 students who had been targeted. She reached out to journalists who specialized in education and civil rights stories. She prepared press releases, legal briefs, and a comprehensive report that documented the entire conspiracy. And she installed a small, nearly invisible camera in Diego's backpack, the same type she had used in Colombia to expose corruption. "Mijo," she told Diego the night before the test, "tomorrow, you just focus on the mathematics. Let me worry about everything else." "But mommy, what if they say I cheated again? What if they take away my scholarship?" "Diego," her voice was different now, stronger, more confident. For a moment, he glimpsed the woman she had been before they came to America. "Trust me, I know exactly what I'm doing." Wednesday afternoon arrived gray and cold. Maria walked Diego to the school, her heart pounding but her face calm. She had learned long ago to never let her opponents see her fear. The testing room was a small classroom in the administrative building, isolated from the main school. The proctor was Mr. James Carlisle, a thin man with cold eyes who worked for Pinnacle Educational Services. He looked at Diego like he was already guilty. "You understand the rules?" Carlisle asked, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Any suspicious behavior, any indication of cheating, and the test is over. Any questions about problems that seem beyond your grade level, and we'll know you had help." Diego nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he sat down at the isolated desk. Maria was directed to wait in the hallway, but she wasn't just waiting. Through a small earpiece connected to the camera in Diego's backpack, she could hear everything happening in that room. And in her purse, her phone was live streaming the audio to her lawyer's office in Miami. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Diego worked through the problems with the same focused intensity she had watched him display countless times. But then Carlisle's behavior began to change. "Interesting approach to that problem," he said, moving closer to Diego's desk. "Where did you learn that method?" I figured it out myself," Diego replied, not looking up from his work. Figured it out yourself. Right. Carlisle made a note on his clipboard. And this formula here, that's pretty advanced for someone your age, someone your background. Diego's voice was smaller now, uncertain. My mom helped me practice. Your mom, the cleaning lady, helped you with advanced calculus. The contempt in his voice was unmistakable. Maria, listening from the hallway, felt something inside her snap. But she waited, because she knew what was coming next. 30 minutes before the test was supposed to end, Carlisle made his move. I'm sorry, Diego, but I'm going to have to stop the test here. What? Why? I'm not finished. I've observed several irregularities in your testing behavior. The way you're approaching these problems, the speed at which you're working, it's consistent with someone who has seen these questions before. But I haven't. I swear I haven't. I'm going to need you to empty your pockets and your backpack. This was it, the moment Maria had been waiting for. Diego, confused and scared, emptied his pockets. Nothing suspicious. Then his backpack, books, pencils, a calculator, and the small camera Maria had hidden there. What's this? Carlisle demanded, holding up the device. I don't know. I've never seen it before. But Carlisle was already reaching into his own bag, pulling out a second device, identical to the first. 2 recording devices, he said, his voice filled with false triumph. So you were cheating. You had someone feeding you answers through these things. No, I don't even know what those are. But Carlisle was already writing on his clipboard, already preparing his report. Another minority student caught cheating, another scholarship revoked, another threat to the natural order eliminated. What he didn't realize was that Maria's camera had been recording everything, including what happened next. Carlisle pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Mrs. Henderson, it's Carlisle. We got him. Found 2 recording devices in his backpack. Yeah, I know. They're getting more sophisticated. But don't worry. This one's airtight. No way they can fight this. A pause. The devices? I'll dispose of them. No need for evidence when the case is this clear-cut. The kid's obviously been getting help all along. Probably explains all his previous high scores, too. Another pause, and Carlisle's voice became colder. The mother? She'll probably cry and beg, but what can she do? She's just a cleaning lady. No resources, no connections, no understanding of how the system works. By tomorrow, this whole family will be forgotten. But as Carlisle reached for the cameras to destroy them, the classroom door burst open. Maria González-Restrepo walked into that classroom like she was walking into a courtroom where she had never lost a case. Her posture was different. Her voice was different. Everything about her was different. Gone was the meek cleaning lady with broken English. In her place stood a woman who had made Colombia's most powerful criminals tremble with fear. Mr. Carlisle, she said, her English suddenly perfect, crisp, and commanding. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Carlisle looked up, confused. This wasn't the woman he had expected to deal with. Mrs. Gonzalez, you're not supposed to be in here. The test is over. Your son was caught. My son was framed. Maria's voice cut through his words like a blade. And you, Mr. Carlisle, just confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud on a recording device that has been live streaming to my lawyer's office for the past 2 hours. The color drained from Carlisle's face. What are you talking about? Maria smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a prosecutor who had just cornered her prey. My name is Maria Elena González-Restrepo. In Colombia, I was the lead prosecutor for the anti-corruption unit. I put 17 politicians in prison and dismantled 3 criminal organizations before I was forced to flee for my family's safety. She stepped closer, and Carlisle instinctively stepped back. Did you really think I would send my son into this room without protection? Did you really think I wouldn't recognize a setup when I saw one? Diego stared at his mother in amazement. This was a side of her he had never seen, never even imagined. The camera you just tried to destroy? It's been recording everything. Your conversation with Mrs. Henderson, your planted evidence, your confession to fraud, all of it. Pulled out her phone and showed Carlisle the live stream. His own face stared back at him, frozen in the moment he had tried to frame a 12-year-old boy. But that's not all, Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. I have recordings of Mrs. Henderson discussing her systematic targeting of minority students. I have financial records showing the kickback scheme between the school board and Pinnacle Educational Services. I have testimony from 17 other families whose children were similarly framed. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. And now I have video evidence of you attempting to plant evidence on a minor. In federal court, Mr. Carlisle. That's called a civil rights violation under color of law. The penalty is 10 years in federal prison. What happened next was like watching a controlled demolition. Carlisle, faced with the choice between confessing and going to federal prison, chose confession. But his confession revealed something even more shocking than Maria had expected. You don't understand, Carlisle said, his voice breaking. This isn't just about your son. This is about the whole system. Henderson has been running this operation for years, dozens of districts, hundreds of students. It's not just about keeping minorities out of advanced programs. It's about funneling the smart ones into vocational tracks where they can't compete for elite college admissions. Maria's expression didn't change, but inside, her prosecutor's instincts were screaming. This was bigger than she had thought. Keep talking, she said simply. The testing company, Pinnacle, it's not just Henderson's family business. It's connected to a whole network of education consultants, admissions counselors, even some college administrators. They've been systematically identifying high-achieving minority students and sabotaging their academic trajectories. Carlisle was crying now, the weight of what he had been part of finally hitting him. We told ourselves we were maintaining standards, preserving excellence, but really, we were just protecting privilege, making sure the right kids got the right opportunities. Maria pulled out her phone and called a number. Carlos, it's Maria. We need to expand the investigation. This is much bigger than we thought. What happened next was a cascade of revelations that would eventually make national news. The phone call to Henderson was brief and devastating. It's over, Patricia. She knows everything. She has everything. We need to fix this now, or we're all going to prison. Henderson's voice, coming through the speakerphone, was panicked. What do you mean she knows everything? She's just a cleaning lady. She's not just a cleaning lady. She's a former prosecutor. And she just destroyed us. Within an hour, Principal Morrison was in the room. Then the superintendent. Then the school board's lawyer, who took one look at Maria's evidence and immediately began discussing settlement terms. But Maria wasn't interested in settlements. Not yet. My son will retake the test, she announced to the room full of administrators, under proper supervision, with independent proctors from the state education department. And when he scores in the 99th percentile again, you will publicly apologize to him and to every other student you have wronged. Mrs. Gonzalez, the superintendent began, perhaps we can reach some kind of agreement. The agreement is this, Maria interrupted. You will implement new testing protocols that prevent this kind of discrimination. You will compensate the families you have harmed. You will ensure that Mrs. Henderson and Mr. Carlisle never work in education again. And you will cooperate fully with the federal investigation that begins tomorrow morning. She paused, looking around the room at the faces of people who had underestimated her. Or I will file federal civil rights charges against every person in this room, and I will make sure this story is on the front page of every newspaper in the country. The room fell silent. Your choice. The federal investigation that followed was swift and devastating. Within weeks, FBI agents were interviewing families across 3 states. Financial records were subpoenaed. Email servers were seized. Phone records were analyzed. What they found was a conspiracy that reached far beyond one school district. Pinnacle Educational Services had contracts with 47 school districts across 8 states. In every district, the same pattern emerged. High-achieving minority students flagged for irregularities. Additional testing that somehow always resulted in lower scores, and opportunities redirected to white and Asian students. The financial incentives were staggering. The company had generated over $50 million in revenue over 5 years, with bonuses tied directly to the number of irregular test results they identified. But the human cost was even more devastating. Over 300 students had been affected, scholarships lost, advanced programs denied, college opportunities destroyed, entire life trajectories altered by a system designed to maintain educational segregation. Henderson was arrested on federal civil rights charges. Carlisle cooperated with investigators and received a reduced sentence. The CEO of Pinnacle Educational Services was indicted on fraud and conspiracy charges. But the real victory came when Diego retook his test under proper supervision and scored even higher than before. The story broke on a Tuesday morning, and by evening, it was the lead story on every major news network. Education conspiracy. Systematic discrimination against minority students exposed across multiple states. The headlines were devastating. The investigation that followed was even worse. Maria found herself at the center of a media storm she hadn't expected. Reporters camped outside their apartment. Interview requests poured in from national news programs. Civil rights organizations hailed her as a hero. But Maria was careful about how she handled the attention. She had learned in Colombia that media could be a powerful weapon, but it could also be dangerous. She agreed to one major interview with a respected journalist who specialized in education and civil rights stories. The interview aired on a Sunday evening and was watched by over 15 million people. "Mrs. Gonzalez," the interviewer asked, "you could have used your legal background from the beginning to fight this system. Why did you wait?" Maria considered the question carefully. "Because I needed to understand the system first. In Colombia, corruption was obvious. Bribes, threats, violence. Here, it was hidden behind policies and procedures and good intentions. I needed to see how it really worked before I could fight it effectively." And what do you want people to take away from your story? That your voice matters. That your children's intelligence cannot be diminished by someone else's prejudice. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let people underestimate you. Because when they think you're invisible, they forget that you can see everything they're trying to hide. The impact of Maria's case extended far beyond their school district. Within 6 months, 17 states had launched investigations into their testing practices. Congress held hearings on educational discrimination. The Department of Education issued new guidelines for academic integrity assessments. But the most important changes happened at the individual level. Families who had been told their children weren't smart enough began to question those assessments. Students who had been tracked into vocational programs demanded retesting. Parents who had accepted their children's limitations started fighting for their rights. Maria received hundreds of letters from families across the country. Stories of children who had been told they weren't college material, who had been steered away from advanced programs, who had been made to feel like their intelligence was somehow suspect. And slowly, those families began to fight back. 6 months after the confrontation, Maria stood in front of the state legislature, testifying about educational discrimination and civil rights. Her English was perfect, her presence commanding, her message clear. But she still cleaned office buildings at night. Not because she had to anymore. The settlement from the school district had been substantial, and she had been offered several high-paying legal positions. But because she wanted to. Because in those quiet hours after midnight, she could listen, observe, and protect other families who might not have the tools to protect themselves. Diego thrived in the advanced program, but more importantly, he had learned something that no test could measure: the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. "Mommy," he said one evening as they sat at their kitchen table, "I understand now why you didn't tell me about Colombia." "Why is that, mijo?" "Because you needed me to know that I was smart because of who I am, not because of who you were. You needed me to believe in myself first." Maria smiled, the same smile she had given him every night at their kitchen table for 5 years. "And do you believe in yourself?" "Yes, but I also believe in something else now." "What's that?" "I believe that we can change things, that we can make it better for other kids like me." 1 year after the confrontation, Maria and Diego stood outside a small brick building nestled between a church and a library. On the glass door was a hand-painted sign, González Education Justice Center. Inside, there were no mahogany desks or leather chairs, just a clean space with donated computers and a wall lined with books, legal guides, civil rights history, resources for families who never knew they had any power. The center provided free legal assistance to families facing educational discrimination. It offered tutoring and test preparation for students who had been told they weren't smart enough. It trained parents to advocate for their children's rights. But most importantly, it gave families something they had never had before: hope. "Anyone come in today?" Maria asked the young woman at the front desk, a recent law school graduate she had sponsored. "3 families," the woman replied. "A teenager from East Riverside who thinks her guidance counselor is steering her away from AP classes because of her accent. A middle schooler whose teacher says he's not college material, despite straight A's. And a mother who wants to know how to fight back when the system tries to silence her child." Maria nodded slowly. These stories were all too familiar. This was why she did it. Not to get even, not to prove something to the people who had underestimated her, but to rewrite the story for someone else, someone who might not be as lucky to catch the lie in time. 2 years after the confrontation, Maria received a letter that made her hands tremble. It was from Colombia, from the prosecutor's office she had once led, the senator she had been investigating, the one whose threats had forced her to flee, had finally been arrested. The case she had built, the evidence she had gathered, had finally brought him down. The human trafficking ring had been dismantled. The corrupt network had been destroyed. "Your work here is finished," the letter read. "The threats against you and your family have been eliminated. You can come home now. Your old position is waiting for you." Maria read the letter twice, then walked to the kitchen, where Diego was doing homework at their small table, the same table where they had sat together every night for 5 years. "Mijo," she said softly, "how would you feel about going back to Colombia?" Diego looked up, surprised. "I thought we couldn't go back. I thought it wasn't safe." "It's safe now. The people who threatened us are gone. We could go back if we wanted to." Diego considered this for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Mommy, what about the center? What about all the families who need our help?" Maria looked around their small apartment, at the photos on the wall of Diego receiving his scholarship, at the letters from families they had helped, at the life they had built from nothing. "You're right, mijo. Our work here isn't finished yet. Besides," Diego added, grinning, "I'm American now too. This is my home." Maria felt tears in her eyes. "Yes, mijo, this is our home." 3 years after the confrontation, Maria received a phone call that brought everything full circle. "Mrs. Gonzalez, this is Sarah Chen. I think you knew my aunt, Patricia Henderson." Maria's blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "I want to apologize, and I want to help." Sarah Chen, it turned out, was a recent graduate of Harvard Law School. She had grown up hearing whispered conversations about her aunt's work about the problem of minority students in advanced programs. She had believed, for years, that her aunt was protecting academic standards, until she saw Maria's story on the news. I realized that everything I had achieved, my test scores, my college admissions, my opportunities, might have come at the expense of students like Diego. Students who were smarter than me, but didn't have the same advantages. Sarah wanted to join the Education Justice Center. She wanted to use her legal training and her insider knowledge of the system to help other families fight back. "I can't undo what my family did," she said, "but maybe I can help make sure it never happens again." Maria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Can you start Monday?" By the fourth year, the González Education Justice Center had become a model for similar organizations across the country. Centers opened in Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Phoenix, each one staffed by lawyers, educators, and advocates who understood that the fight for educational equity was far from over. The network shared resources, strategies, and success stories. They tracked patterns of discrimination across districts and states. They provided training for parents who wanted to advocate for their children but didn't know how. And they won cases, hundreds of them. Students who had been told they weren't smart enough were retested and placed in advanced programs. Families who had been intimidated into silence found their voices. School districts that had operated discriminatory systems were forced to change. But perhaps most importantly, they changed the conversation about educational equity. They made it clear that discrimination in schools wasn't just about separate facilities or unequal funding. It was also about the subtle ways that bias and prejudice could destroy a child's future. 5 years after the confrontation, Maria found herself in Washington, D.C., testifying before a congressional committee about educational discrimination and civil rights. The hearing room was packed with reporters, advocates, and families who had been affected by similar discrimination. Diego, now 17 and preparing for college, sat in the front row. "Mrs. Gonzalez," the committee chair asked, "what would you say to other families who are facing similar discrimination but feel powerless to fight back?" Maria looked out at the audience, at the faces of parents and students who had traveled from across the country to be there. "I would tell them that they have more power than they know, that their voice matters, that their children's intelligence cannot be diminished by someone else's prejudice." She paused, thinking of all the families she had helped over the past 5 years. "I would tell them that the system counts on their silence. It counts on their fear. It counts on their belief that they don't have the resources or the knowledge to fight back." Her voice grew stronger. "But the truth is, the most powerful weapon we have is the truth itself. And when we stand together, when we refuse to be silenced, when we demand justice for our children, that's when real change happens." The room erupted in applause. Diego graduated as valedictorian of his high school class. He was accepted to MIT, Harvard, Stanford, and every other university he applied to. But more importantly, he had learned something that no test could measure: the power of standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem impossible. At his graduation ceremony, he was asked to give a speech. He looked out at the audience, at his classmates, their families, and his mother sitting in the front row, and began to speak. 5 years ago, someone tried to tell me that I wasn't smart enough, that I didn't belong in advanced programs, that my achievements were somehow suspect because of who I am and where I come from. He paused, looking directly at his mother. "But my mother taught me something important. She taught me that our worth is not determined by what other people think of us, that our intelligence cannot be diminished by their prejudice, and that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let people underestimate us." The audience was completely silent, because when they think we're invisible, they forget that we can see everything they're trying to hide. And when we finally speak up, when we finally fight back, we don't just change our own lives, we change the system for everyone who comes after us. He smiled, the same smile his mother had given him every night at their kitchen table. So to every student who has ever been told they're not smart enough, not good enough, not worthy enough, remember this: your voice matters, your dreams matter, and you have more power than you know. As Maria watched her son speak, she thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The fear, the struggle, the moments when she had wondered if they would ever truly belong in this country. But they had done more than belong. They had changed things. They had made it better for other families, other children, other dreamers who just needed someone to believe in them. After the ceremony, as they walked across the campus where Diego would soon be a student, he turned to her and asked, "Mommy, do you ever regret leaving Colombia? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had stayed?" Maria considered the question. "No, mijo, because I learned something important here. In Colombia, I fought corruption that was obvious, bribes, threats, violence. But here, I learned to fight corruption that was hidden, systematic, designed to look like fairness while perpetuating injustice." She paused, looking at the students walking around them, young people from every background, every culture, every corner of the world. "And I learned that the most important battles aren't always the ones that make headlines. Sometimes they're the quiet fights, the ones that happen in classrooms and conference rooms and school board meetings, the ones that change one life at a time." Diego nodded, understanding. "So what's next?" he asked. Maria smiled. "Next, you go to college and change the world, and I keep fighting for the families who need someone in their corner. And after that, we keep going, because the work is never finished. There will always be another family that needs help, another child who needs someone to believe in them, another system that needs to be changed." She put her arm around her son's shoulders. "But that's okay, because we know something now that we didn't know 5 years ago." "What's that?" "We know that we're not alone. We know that when we stand together, when we refuse to be silenced, when we demand justice, we can change anything. Have you ever been underestimated because of who you are or where you come from? Have you ever watched injustice happen and felt powerless to stop it? Maria's story proves that you have more power than you think, that your voice matters, that your children's intelligence cannot be diminished by someone else's prejudice. But here's the thing, Maria's fight isn't over. Across the country, there are still families facing the same discrimination Diego faced. Still children being told they're not smart enough. Still systems designed to maintain inequality while pretending to promote fairness. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Share this story, because somewhere out there, there's a family facing the same fight Maria and Diego faced. And they need to know they're not alone. They need to know that invisible doesn't mean powerless. They need to know that their voice matters. And they need to know that sometimes, the most unlikely heroes are the ones who change everything. What would you do in Maria's situation? How far would you go to protect your child's future? Have you ever witnessed discrimination in your own community schools? Let me know in the comments below. Share your story, because every voice matters, and every story has the power to change someone's life. And if this story inspired you, if it reminded you that justice is possible, even when the odds seem impossible, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Because the truth is, we all have more power than we think. We just need to be brave enough to use it. The fight for educational equity isn't over. It's happening right now in schools across America. And it needs heroes, people like Maria, like Diego, like you, who are willing to stand up and say enough. Your children's futures depend on it. Your community's future depends on it. And the future of justice itself depends on people who are willing to fight for what's right, even when the system tells them they don't matter. You matter. Your voice matters. And your story could be the one that changes everything. The fight continues. Will you join it?